The ancient discipline men worship was not built for freedom. Most people do not want to admit that when they stare at Sparta, Rome, or any hard old warrior culture and imagine a clean lesson about toughness, they picture men carved out of pain, men who could sleep on stone, eat almost nothing, obey without flinching, and walk into danger without begging for comfort. Some of that was real, but the mistake is thinking the pain was the point. Pain was only the doorway. The real product was obedience. The real test was not whether a boy could suffer. It was whether the system could take a person with a family, a private will, and a separate identity, and turn him into something the group could use. Ancient discipline feels powerful from a distance because it does not just ask, "Can you endure hardship?" It asks something colder, "Can you be remade?" Start with the image most people think they understand, the Spartan boy at the altar, standing under punishment to prove he is harder than fear. It is one of the most famous pictures of ancient toughness, simple, harsh, and easy to sell. It is also dangerous because the version most people carry in their heads is already wearing a Roman mask. The altar of Artemis Orthia was real. Spartan youth rituals around it were real. Yet the most theatrical version, the public spectacle of boys enduring severe whipping while crowds watched, belongs largely to a later Roman-era Sparta, when the city had already lost the power that made its name terrifying. By around 225 of the Common Era, stone seating was built around that sacred space for spectators. Think about what that means. The myth had bleachers. A society once known for military discipline had become a place where its own reputation could be staged. The old image of Spartan pain was not just remembered, it was performed. It was packaged. It became something outsiders could look at and call strength. A violent image can survive long after the real machinery behind it has rotted away, so forget the theater for a moment. Look at the machine underneath. Spartan boys were taken from ordinary family life at about 7 years old and placed inside a state-controlled system. This was not school in the way we use that word now. It was separation. It was sorting. It was the slow narrowing of a child's world until the group became more important than the home. The body was made uncomfortable on purpose. A boy could be given one simple cloak to last the year. He could go without sandals. He could be trained to treat exposure, hunger, and discomfort as normal conditions, not emergencies. Then came the part that exposes the logic of the whole system. The boys were deliberately underfed. They were pushed toward stealing food. If they were caught, they were punished. Not because stealing itself was the moral failure. The failure was getting caught. That single detail cuts through the romance. This was not a gentle lesson in virtue. It was not a clean lesson in honesty. It taught a boy to survive under pressure, to hide need, to move carefully, to accept pain, and to understand that incompetence had consequences. The crime was not hunger. The crime was being seen. Modern men who fantasize about this kind of discipline usually imagine themselves as the exception. They imagine becoming sharper, harder, more dangerous. They picture themselves above the crowd. Ancient systems like this were not built for lone wolves. They were built to kill the lone wolf early. The boy did not become strong by becoming more individual. He became useful by becoming less separate. His habits, his food, his fear, his pride, even his shame, all got pulled into the same social machine. Comparing the agoge to modern elite training misses the point. Elite training still assumes a person enters as an individual and is tested for skill, endurance, and performance. The Spartan model reached deeper. It removed family bonds early, pressed boys into age groups, used deprivation as instruction, and made the peer group part of the pressure. It looked less like a self-improvement program and more like coercive youth conditioning. That sentence should bother you. It should also clean up the fantasy. A man can be hard and still be owned. Rome understood that even better. Roman military discipline did not depend only on commanders shouting orders from above. In one of its harshest forms, the fustuarium, the punishment came through the unit itself. A soldier who committed certain serious offenses, including falling asleep on watch, could be condemned under military law. Then, the men around him, the same men whose lives his failure had endangered, were made part of the punishment. This was not decimation. Decimation was a different practice, aimed at a group. The fustuarium was targeted. The distinction matters because it reveals the logic and the horror of the method. Rome did not merely say, "The state will punish you." It said, "The men beside you will become the sentence." Brotherhood was not only protection. It was surveillance. It was pressure. It was memory. Every man knew that trust in the unit was not an abstract ideal. It was a matter of survival. and failure could make your own comrades turn against you under the law. This is a much colder form of discipline than simple toughness. A commander can be hated from a distance. A rule can be resented in private. A harsh order can feel separate from the men who suffer under it. Peer enforcement removes that distance. When the group becomes the law, there is no private rebellion left. The man next to you is not just a friend. He is a witness. He is a judge. If the standard breaks, he may be required to help enforce it. Ancient discipline reached into the nervous system of a unit this way. It did not just train men to obey authority. It trained them to fear failing each other. Once you see that, Sparta starts to look different too. The popular story says Spartan discipline was built for war against foreign enemies, Persia, rival Greek cities, armies outside the border. That story is not false, but it is incomplete. Sparta also had an enemy underneath it. The Spartan citizen class ruled over the helots, a subjugated and enslaved population that made the Spartan way of life possible. This is where the queen warrior fantasy starts to decay. Spartan discipline was not floating above society like a pure code of honor. It sat on top of a population that had to be controlled. The fierce warrior system faced inward as much as outward. There are accounts that the ephors, Spartan magistrates, formally declared war on the helots each year. The purpose was not a normal battlefield campaign. It functioned as a legal and religious fiction that helped make violence against helots permissible inside the Spartan order. This detail changes the emotional meaning of the entire system. The question is no longer only, how did Sparta make men so tough? The sharper question is, what kind of society needed its men trained like that? A society surrounded by enemies can build warriors. A society built over people it fears has to build guards. That shadow falls over the Cryptia. The Cryptia is one of the most disputed parts of the Spartan story. Ancient sources do not give one neat version. One tradition frames it more mildly, as a harsh wilderness test. Another darker account describes selected young Spartans operating in secret against helots. Modern analysis often sees the institution as something that may have begun as a coming-of-age ordeal and later developed into a tool of state terror. The safest approach is not to pretend the debate is cleaner than it is. The revealing part is that both versions still point in the same direction. Even if you take the milder version, the training is isolation, exposure, secrecy, and endurance. If you take the darker version, the same structure becomes a weapon against the enslaved population Sparta depended on and feared. Either way, the romantic picture collapses. This was not a society of free men simply making themselves excellent. It was a closed order trying to preserve itself through discipline, fear, and control. The pain at the center of it was not random. The hunger was not random. The group pressure was not random. Each piece trained the person to fit the machine. Machines like that have a weakness. They can teach endurance without teaching judgment. They can produce obedience without producing character. Gylippus is the crack in the statue. He was a Spartan commander associated with military success away from home. He had survived the world that was supposed to make Spartans different from other men. He came from the culture that treated luxury and weakness as enemies. Then wealth entered the story. Entrusted with a large amount of silver, Gylippus was exposed for hiding some of it under the roof tiles of his own house. The coins carried the image of an owl, and the discovery became a perfect little wound in the Spartan myth. A man trained against hunger could still break around money. That does not prove every Spartan was corrupt. Cheap conclusions are for lazy people. The point is sharper than that. A closed system can make a man appear incorruptible only while the walls are still around him. It can train him to withstand pain, shame, cold, and public pressure. It can make him dangerous in formation. Then it sends him outside, where the old pressures no longer hold. Silver finds the crack. Ancient discipline becomes more useful as a warning than as a model right here. If your strength only works inside a cage, it is not strength yet. It is adaptation to captivity. The Mamluk system shows the contrast. The Mamluks were not Spartans. Their discipline came from a different world and a different structure. They were purchased as military slaves, placed into regimented barracks, trained intensely, and eventually formed a military ruling caste. None of that should be romanticized. It was not freedom training. It was another hard machine. Yet its design exposes something Sparta could not solve. Mamluk training emphasized technical skill, especially mounted warfare. Before a trainee reached the live horse, he could be drilled on wooden practice horses. The point was repetition, control, coordination, and eventually mastery under the weight of combat equipment. There was something almost mechanical about that image. Before the live horse came the wooden horse. Not glory, but repetition. Not a speech about courage, but practice. This kind of discipline was still coercive, still bound to power, still built inside a hierarchy that owned men before it elevated them. But as a military system, it had one advantage Sparta did not have in the same way. It could replenish itself. It drew in new trainees from outside and fed the machine with new bodies. Sparta closed itself, and that closure is where the final contradiction begins. To be a full Spartan citizen, a man needed more than training. He needed economic standing. He had to contribute to the common mess, the shared dining institution that marked his place among the citizen warrior class. If he could not meet those obligations, his status could fall away. So imagine the cruelty of that structure. A boy could be taken from home. He could endure hunger. He could learn the rules of silence, pressure, obedience, and shame. He could become exactly the kind of man the city claimed to need. Then, economics could still erase him. The battlefield was not the only test. The dining hall was a gate. The land behind him mattered. The resources attached to his household mattered. Citizenship was not just a warrior identity. It had a price. Over time, Spartan wealth and land became concentrated in fewer hands. Fewer men could maintain the economic requirements attached to full status. The result was oliganthropia, a severe shortage of Spartan citizen men. This is the part the macho version of history usually skips. Sparta did not simply lose because its men became soft. That is the comforting lie weak thinkers prefer, because it lets them turn history into a gym poster. The harder explanation is more embarrassing. The system became too narrow to reproduce itself. A society obsessed with producing an elite class of disciplined men built rules that helped shrink that class. It did not merely lose men in battle. It disqualified men from belonging. It guarded the purity of the warrior identity until there were not enough warriors left to carry it. The machine protected the category and emptied the category. Here is the final lesson of these old systems. And it is not the one people want when they click on ancient discipline. They want a routine, a secret, a masculine code they can borrow without paying the real cost. The real cost was never just cold, hunger, or pain. The cost was the self. Sparta shows a discipline that separated boys early, made discomfort normal, trained hunger into behavior, and tied status to a closed social order. Rome shows discipline enforced by comrades, where trust could become punishment. The Mamluks show a different machine, one that turned purchased outsiders into trained military elites through repetition, skill, and hierarchy. Different worlds, different methods, same warning. Discipline is not automatically noble. A system can make men hard while making them less free. It can make them obedient while leaving them morally fragile. It can make them feared while quietly damaging the structure that keeps them alive. The title cuts both ways. The weak did not survive those ancient discipline systems. Many ordinary men would have broken under the hunger, the pressure, the surveillance, the public shame, and the constant demand to disappear into the group. Eventually, the strongest systems revealed their own weakness. A discipline that cannot survive freedom is not complete discipline. A discipline that needs fear at every level is not self-command. A discipline that can produce soldiers but cannot preserve judgment is dangerous. A discipline that guards status so tightly it runs out of men has confused purity with survival. So do not worship the cage because the men inside looked hard. Ask what the cage was built to protect. Ask who paid for it. Ask what kind of person came out the other side. The ancient world can teach discipline, but not in the childish way people want. It does not say, become like Sparta. It says, look carefully at what Sparta had to destroy to keep its image alive. Pain can sharpen a man. Pressure can expose him. Hard rules can save him from comfort. Yet if your discipline requires you to surrender your judgment, erase your identity, and obey a machine you are too afraid to question, then you are not becoming stronger. You are becoming useful, and useful men are not always free men. If your discipline needs a cage, it is not strength yet. The harder lesson is that comfort can weaken a man, but so can the wrong kind of hardness. A soft man avoids pressure because pressure hurts. A captured man worships pressure because he has mistaken pain for purpose. That difference matters. The Spartan boy was not being trained to discover himself. He was being trained to leave himself behind. The Roman soldier was not only being trained to fear the enemy, he was being trained to fear what would happen if the men beside him stopped trusting him. The Mamluk trainee was not being handed freedom through skill. He was being shaped by a military order that owned the path before it offered status. Ancient discipline was not one thing. It was a set of machines. Some machines made bodies harder. Some made units more reliable. Some made ruling classes safer. Some made men technically brilliant. Some made boys into weapons before they were old enough to understand the price. Using the ancient world as a simple motivational mirror is pathetic. It takes the cleanest image, strips out the cost, ignores the victims underneath it, and turns the rest into a slogan. Wake up early, eat less, stop complaining, be Spartan. Fine, there is nothing wrong with discomfort. There is nothing wrong with training the body to obey when mood collapses. There is nothing wrong with learning that hunger, cold, fatigue, and boredom do not deserve to be your gods. Most people need more discipline, not less. But if your only model of discipline is submission to pressure, you are not building a man. You are building a tool. A tool does not need judgment. A tool does not ask whether the mission is worth serving. A tool does not question the hands that use it. A tool just performs. Here is the ugly brilliance of these systems. They understood that the easiest way to control a man is not always to make him weak. Sometimes it is to make him proud of the chains. Make him proud of the pain. Make him proud that he does not need comfort. Make him proud that he can be silent when something inside him should speak. Then he will defend the very structure that owns him, because admitting the structure is wrong would mean admitting his suffering was not automatically noble. The modern fantasy gets exposed at that exact point. A man sees the Spartan cloak and thinks, I want that toughness. He sees the Roman standard and thinks, I want that loyalty. He sees the Mamluk training ground and thinks, I want that mastery. He rarely asks what those systems demanded in exchange. The cloak came with separation. The loyalty came with terror. The mastery came through ownership and hierarchy. None of that means the ancient world has nothing to teach. It means the lesson is sharper than the fantasy. Real discipline is not the ability to endure anything. A slave can endure. A prisoner can endure. A terrified soldier can endure. Endurance alone is not freedom. Sometimes endurance is just what remains when choice has been removed. Real discipline begins when a man can suffer without becoming stupid, obey without becoming blind, train without becoming cruel, and belong to a group without surrendering his conscience to it. This is a much harder standard than the childish version. The childish version says, can you take pain? The adult version says, can you take pain and still think clearly? Can you lose comfort without losing your judgment? Can you follow orders without worshiping authority? Can you become dangerous without needing someone beneath you to prove it? Sparta struggled with that last question. Its identity depended on a class beneath it. Its discipline looked heroic from the outside, but inside the structure was a permanent fear. Fear of disorder, fear of weakness, fear of the enslaved people who made the Spartan lifestyle possible, fear of losing the status that made a man fully Spartan. Fear can build discipline. It can also poison it. Rome understood fear differently. Rome tied it to duty, law, and unit survival. A man on watch was not just tired. If he slept, others could die. The punishment was designed to make that truth unforgettable. Cruel, yes. Effective, yes. Clean, no. The Mamluk system reveals another side. Technical discipline can create extraordinary skill, but skill alone does not make a system humane. A wooden horse, repeated drills, controlled progression, and mounted mastery can produce elite performance. They can also exist inside an order where the person being trained is not truly free at the beginning. The pattern keeps repeating. Ancient systems often separated performance from freedom. They could produce men who looked powerful while narrowing the conditions under which that power existed. Put them in formation, under law, inside ritual, inside hierarchy, and they worked. Remove the frame, and the weakness appeared. Gylippus was not just a story about stolen silver. He was a warning about borrowed virtue. If your honesty only exists because poverty leaves you nothing to steal, it is not honesty yet. If your courage only exists because shame is watching, it is not courage yet. If your discipline only exists because the group will punish you, it is not self-command yet. It is pressure management. Useful, maybe. Impressive, sometimes. But incomplete. The collapse of Sparta matters so much for that reason. It is not just a historical ending. It is the final insult to the fantasy. The same society that obsessed over producing a narrow warrior class created conditions where that class became harder and harder to maintain. A man could be trained, hardened, and shaped, then lose the status that made him belong. The system did not merely ask, are you strong enough? It also asked, can you afford to remain one of us? That is not warrior purity. It is a gate closing from the inside. So, when people say weak men could not survive ancient discipline, they are right. but not in the way they think. Weak bodies would suffer, weak wills would fold. Weak nerves would break under hunger, shame, peer pressure, and fear. A deeper weakness could survive perfectly well inside those systems. The weakness of needing a machine to give you identity. The weakness of mistaking obedience for honor. The weakness of calling yourself strong because you can suffer while never asking who benefits from your suffering. That weakness can wear armor. That weakness can march in formation. That weakness can speak in the language of duty, tradition, and toughness. It can look powerful for a long time. Then the silver appears, or the mess dues come due, or the myth needs Roman tourists to keep it alive, or the citizen class shrinks, or the system finally proves it can manufacture hardness, but not wisdom. Here is the line. Discipline should make you harder to corrupt, not easier to command. It should make you more capable of truth, not more loyal to illusion. It should help you stand alone when the group becomes wrong, not train you to disappear into the group because standing alone feels unsafe. The ancient world does not give you a clean hero to copy. It gives you a warning carved into harder material. Pain is not proof. Obedience is not character. Endurance is not freedom. And a man who survives the cage may still have to ask whether anything free survived inside him.